Hi and welcome back to another story from Reddit, Tales from Tech Support. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for future content. Let's now get straight into today's video. Now I'll always work on an empty stomach. Story from a job I had a few years ago. Level 1 tech at an MSP. We had one huge customer that took up about 90% of our work. They had this really old company intranet with their own ticketing system integrated into it. All the users used this and it was the core of all their business processes. They had a clueless development team that was supposed to manage the intranet and assist with any problems with it. And oh my, were there a lot of problems with it. The story of how this software was created is a story in itself. Long story short, it was made about 6 years prior by an outsourced company that went bust soon after making it. So nobody knew how it worked. They hired a load of devs to try and manage this thing. 6 years later they're still struggling. Anyway, I'd seen this ticket floating around from a pretty high up manager who wasn't able to create, receive or view any purchase orders. It had been around most of the techs and they were all stumped. The intranet was just spitting a load of code at her whenever she tried to do anything on there. This kind of issue was for their in-house dev team to deal with as it's their software. Also, we just did first-line support for them. We don't have the access to their systems to fix something like this. We were more of a reception desk than a help desk. The ticket had been open for a while now and it had enough info in, so I passed it over to their devs. They sent it back to me in record time. Wow, I thought they're on it today. No. They had replied basically saying they have no idea what the error means and it'll probably work tomorrow. This was a very common occurrence with them. Well, the ticket had been open for more than a week at this point, so I passed it straight back stating this. And that it's nothing an external T1 can help with. Straight back it came with almost the same response, just copied and pasted. This happened all too often. They just didn't care. And they didn't have phones and never replied to our emails, so getting in contact with anyone specific on their team was very difficult. I was about to go to my manager about it when I got a call in. It was the user from this ticket. Oh joy. It was my job to tell them their company don't care about her problems. In a nice way, of course. Anyways, they completely understood. This was clearly not the first time they'd been through this. But she was high up and needed this working ASAP. I told her I'd get my manager involved and try and get it sorted as soon as possible. While I was on the phone I thought, I may as well take a look at the issue. An eighth pair of eyes on this can't hurt. I got connected over and watched her got through the process to get this error up. I knew the system pretty well and I knew the error was coming up just before she has to enter the date into the purchase order. The code in the error was just gibberish to me. It meant nothing to a little L1 tech. I happened to glance at the bottom right of her screen as I wanted to know what time it was. Curious, her date's in American format. No, it can't be. I hate this job. Yep, I changed the date to UK date format, and presto, it started working. Clearly the intranet used the local date and time when pulling through dates, and could only read UK format. When it tried to load the dates it just failed and threw up the error. I've never had a user as happy as she was. Safe to say my manager got an email praising me. Funny thing was, I was checking the time on her machine because I was hungry and wanted to know when my lunch was. My love for food always comes in handy. I moved away from that company not long after. I had no issue with them. It was the customer I hated, and most of our work was done for them. I've got plenty of stories from my time supporting them, so let me know if you want to hear more. The one about how their intranet was created is a doozy. So, you're complaining about being called out for violating cybersecurity protocols? All right. Greetings to you all. It's time for another story from the cybersecurity realm. For those interested in cybersecurity, this may help change your mind. As a reminder, this happened on a military installation, so names, mission types, shoe sizes and interoffice romances will all be redacted. The cast in order of tree ring growth. User. The cause of our story today. Tech. Our plucky, cyber operations tech who's afraid of conflict. Supervisor. User's supervisor whose competency I question. Newbievisor. My awesome supervisor who hasn't been a supervisor for more than a month. Lead. My awesome lead who recently got promoted to captain, it just means he won't get lost as often now. Me. Apparently I'm part pitbull, though I'm not much taller than a dachshund. Glue. A can of glue. We had our problem child, user, today who was needing assistance with one of her machines. She'd contacted our cyber operations team, put in an incident request, surprisingly, and things started going downhill from here. Her description in the incident request was amazingly vague and completely useless for the tech to try and resolve remotely, so he called to find out where her office was located, and where in said office she sat. After getting her location, Tech makes his way to her problematic computer, and upon his arrival, finds that she's not there. What he does find is much worse. Her office is a very sensitive office, dealing with information that is vital for our pilots. She'd left her desk while leaving her smart card plugged into an unlocked machine, and she was nowhere to be found. It's not a very big office, and from user's desk, you can clearly see who's in this office as well as all the walls. Tech figured he'd give her a break and place her smart card underneath her keyboard. However, when he lifted the keyboard, he found a sticky note with a password written on it. Tech sighed to himself, gathered the smart card, left the office, and sought out his lead and supervisor who subsequently directed him to my office. Tech then spoke to my supervisor and lead, and after some back and forth discussion, decided that user needed to have a talking to. Newbievisor and lead had initially decided to go handle this themselves, but then decided to send the bald, half-deaf, thick-skinned, oddball from the back of the office, me. Newbievisor gave me clear instructions to be the professional bad guy in dealing with her. I asked for clarification, because I can be professional or I can be the bad guy, but I don't know how to do both. I was again reminded to be the professional bad guy. I still don't know what that means. With Tech leading the way, we made our way to her office and desk. Tech filled me in on what he encountered and was hoping that we could handle this. We get to her office, my first time there, and I noted that no one there has questioned who we are, or why we are there. Everybody there was working in those open-air cubes, meaning that nobody had any walls to block their line of sight to their other coworkers. We make our way to user's desk and Tech shows me the password sticky that's affixed to the bottom of the keyboard. I take user's smart card, grab the sticky, and Tech informs me that he found user in supervisor's office with the door shut, mind you. Tech turns to me and asks if he has to be here. He's got an expression on his face that he'd rather be anywhere than here. Given her history of trying to break people to her will, I tell Tech to bounce out. Less than 2 minutes later, the door to supervisor's office opens and user steps out. Seeing me, she asked if I was waiting to speak to supervisor. I replied that I'm actually here to see her and her supervisor, and motioned for the two of us to step back in. I shut the door and proceed to explain that her smart card, unsecured workstation and password under the keyboard were brought to my attention. I reminded her of the cyber awareness training that we all have to take yearly, those who know what I'm talking about, and asked her if she remembered the parts that stressed not leaving our workstations unsecure, leaving our smart card unattended, and writing passwords down in an easy-to-access area. User attempted to pass off the sticky, saying that nobody would know what the password is for or that it's even a password. I reminded her that leaving passwords out in the open is not only wrong, it's dangerous for the line of work that we do. At this point, Supervisor jumped to her defense, demanding to know who I am. In their defense, I did fail to announce who I am, and what office I work in. Supervisor thought he could get the upper hand on this conversation by declaring that they had no way of knowing who I was right off the bat and that I could have been a spy. I quickly put him in his place by telling him that nobody out in that office did anything to challenge my presence, or what I was doing at her desk. User tried to steer the complaint away from her and accused me of not talking to her professionally and being aggressive, and that, in her words, I was treating her like a killer and a criminal. I told her that I've dealt with killers and criminals and that I'm being nowhere close aggressive to her. I also stressed to both of them that my office takes spillage seriously, and that this is what we have been tasked with handling by our director. I told user that if she has any comments, concerns or questions that she could take it up with Newbievisor and lead. Upon hearing lead's name, her face took on a bit of a smirk and said that she will talk to him. I returned her CAC, but kept the sticky to properly dispose of the password in our office shred bin. Newbievisor had bounced out for a meeting, so I filled lead in on what I found and what was said. And wouldn't you know it, less than 10 minutes after I'd returned to my office, she's ringing the doorbell. Lead gets the door and allows her to vent about her perceived treatment from me, going so far as to say that she didn't like the way I talked to her. Lead paused for a moment and said that in the end it all comes down to her not following the outlined procedures. He went on to say that despite how I allegedly talked to her, everybody in our building is responsible for security and that it's concerning that her office is taking a rather lax approach to it. Lead then told her that he would talk with Newbievisor about their office to determine if an audit is warranted. User had the balls to ask Lead if he was going to talk to me about how I handled the situation. Lead had the best response. No, I sent him up there for a reason and it got the results I was looking for. User thanked Lead for his time and left in a huff. A while later, Lead and I got Newbievisor up to speed on everything and it was determined that no audit will take place, but he will bring up the issue to supervisor and possibly the director. Some days, this boring job gets to be a bit of fun. Still makes me wish I had disabled her account and forced her to retake the cyber awareness training. TLDR. You're probably wondering how the can of glue fits into all this. I knew you'd get stuck on that. 95% of people watching aren't current subscribers. Please take a moment to subscribe to the channel as it really helps to create better content going forward. The Why I'm Not Allowed On or Under Tables story. Or, unusual problems with Polycoms. I worked in IT at a number of universities, where pay is bad and clients have unusually weird problems. On our tiny team, each person had a speciality, and my IT strength lay in the fact that I was short and light, the only person able to fit into the small, awkward places that cables and misplaced equipment can fall into. I was also the most junior, so that meant anything having to do with video conferences fell to me, because video conferences are absolute torturous hell. On this particular occasion my height was working against me. I had set up all of the video conference equipment in our newly outfitted meeting room, which had just been given a very expensive table at the whim of some administrator as well as a fancy new television stand. Everything was plugged in. But I was facing a stupid problem, the TV was off. And in the installation of the fancy new everything, someone had lost the remote. The TV had a manual button on the top of the screen, which was now about 8 feet off the ground. I couldn't reach it. And all of the conference chairs were on wheels, so that made them the last resort for standing on. The only good surface to stand on is the new table. So, I climbed up on it. And that would have been absolutely fine, as I told my boss later, because I'm light and know my limits, except that right then one of our 2 helpful student workers came in to see if they could help. They saw me get up on the table and decided that they should also get up on the table in case that made things better. We found out the hard way that this fancy table's legs were all in the middle, rather than the corners. The inevitable happens, it tipped, and I, next to the fancy new TV stand, started falling directly towards the technology. The only thing that filled my mind was that I could not damage the technology. I'm afraid to disappoint for comedy standards, that neither the TV nor table were broken. Instead, I wrenched my shoulder bad enough to need physical therapy after I did this spectacular mid-air twist, throwing myself into the wall instead of marring any of the technology. Because I was in IT, and we never hurt our machines. My boss, a great guy, was not pleased. Also not pleased when I marked down on the injury sheet that this was done in the normal line of duty because, as I pointed out, we had to stand on tables all the time. We didn't actually have any equipment thanks to the old, terrible boss. He bought us a ladder and made me promise not to climb any more tables. Which I tried not to, whenever reasonably possible. Some background knowledge about Polycoms. Before Skype existed, and then way after, a few companies realized they could make and sell very expensive microphones and cameras that talked only to each other. It's a great business model, because if your school or company has Polycom and another school or company wants to talk to you, they also have to buy specifically a Polycom, because none of the other company's machines would talk to each other, and even better, exactly the same model of machine you do. And, once you've shilled out for a Polycom, why would you throw it away and use something like Skype instead? The important part is, Polycoms hate talking to each other. Each model's setup is extremely different, with some versions coming with screens that had dozens of buttons and options on them and some coming with controls that had 3. In order to get 2 Polycoms to connect at all, you needed to input a meeting code and sometimes a password. Ideally, this code was just an IP address, but sometimes the codes were absolutely whack job for no discernible reason. I was once unable to connect to a remote classroom because the room code included a @ sign, and the Polycom available to use didn't have a @ sign on the remote. Try explaining that to an impatient professor in front of a room of staring students. But sometimes you would put in the same IP address into the same machine every single week and get completely different results every time. This was especially the case with the other incident, a weekly lecture series, beamed out to multiple other schools, with a packed lecture hall and important speakers. Anyone who has done video conference work should be cringing. Multiple locations and high stakes. The connections never, ever worked correctly. The other side would unmute themselves somehow. They would forget to turn their camera on. Their TVs would break. I eventually had the personal cells of IT support at both other schools on speed dial. Nice people, luckily. The professor who brought in the lecturers for the lecture series and I became friends. Because she actually showed up for pre-lecture video testing on time each week, even though the lecturers never, ever did. She told me about unruly students and I told her about the table incident. Finally, the last week of the lecture series came. And it was a big one. The state rep for related field was the guest speaker. And the room was packed. Of course, the video equipment was failing left and right. But me and the other school's IT techs were solving problems left and right too. We were champions at this by now. Until, with 1 minute left until the speech began, my side had a problem. Someone had managed to unplug one of my carefully taped down cables. The resulting power outage caused the central control unit to reset. This unit is what allowed the lecturer to transmit their PowerPoint to the distance locations as well as our own room's projector screen, and the projector screen itself. Resetting made the PPT stop sending, and also made the screen go up. This projector screen was a serious unit. About 30 feet wide and 15 feet tall. It takes time to go up and down. Time that no amount of IT magic can speed up. It was a tense situation. In other words, I got the power restored and the PPT streaming again in record time. And told the projector, having completed its laborious trip up, to make the laborious trip down. Meanwhile, I'm determined to not have this problem happen again. So that means I need to add some more tape to the cable, which runs under the awkwardly large table on the lecture stage. What's the table even for? It holds water bottles and the professor's bags, and honestly, someone probably just put a table on the stage once and never took it away. My professor friend even made a joke about me being careful around the table. Don't hurt yourself, yeah. It's not an unrealistic concern. I think every tech has hit their head at least once in a rushed job. I secured the cable, and in the most slow, exaggeratedly safe method ever used, extracted myself from under the table. I had forgotten about the fucking projector screen. It hit me in the back of the head as it finished coming down. And this thing is huge. It weighs a ton for something that's basically a big sheet and a weight rod. It hit me. I ricocheted forward and smacked face first into the table, and screamed, "Shit," in front of the 3 collective audiences. The professor helped me off stage and assured the state rep, "Sorry, she's not allowed near tables anymore."